Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. I'm getting ready for a weekend demonstrating Iron Age dyes, and the first thing that I need to do is get all of my supplies ready. Depending on where you're based, the Iron Age can have quite different meanings in terms of dateline. So in Britain we generally would take it to mean any time from around 800 BC up until the time the Romans turn up in 43 AD. If you're on the continent though, it can mean an awful lot earlier because technology moves across the world quite steadily, moving from east to west. Some of the best surviving evidence we have comes from places like Austria, and in particular the salt mines near Hallstatt, where surviving textiles can go back right into the Bronze Age, so up to about 3,000 years ago. The Iron Age textiles there are particularly good though, and that's going to give me quite a lot of information to base my reconstruction on. The first thing, of course, that I need is something to dye, and we will be doing some spinning this weekend, encouraging lots of people to have a go, but I'm going to be setting up some ready spun wool to take with me, ready to go in the dye pots. This is a Jacob wool. Now Jacob, most people think of as being a relatively modern breed. It's those spotty sheep, the ones with brown and white fleece. They quite often have horns, they have some good characteristics. And actually, although in the form we have them today, they're a more modern breed, they're not a bad ringer for primitive style fleeces. So that's going to work very nicely. A Shetland style wool also works well. Scouring the wool is going to be extremely important. You can't expect any sort of fibre to take dye well if it's dirty. And we do have a top tip here that we can work with. Pliny talks about the Gauls using a soap made from goat fat and wood ash, and here's some I made earlier. This is actually using venison fat. I didn't have any goat to hand at the time, but it works really well. If I fluff a little bit up, it doesn't look very exciting. I've had this pot of soft soap for several years now, but it's made with ashes and rainwater, which makes the lye, and then the animal fat is cooked up in that until you get a really nice soapy water. Now I'm going to be getting that into a bucket in a moment, putting in my fleece, giving it a really good wash. This will remove any grease, any dirt, any particles that could get in the way of the dye. Once the fleece is nice and clean, my next consideration is how to make the colour stick. Now today there are many mordants available to us, but we haven't got such strong evidence for that in the Iron Age. What we do know from things like the Hallstatt textiles are that tannin shows up in analysis. And one of the best sources of tannin are galls. Now there are lots of different types of oak galls. These marble galls, for example, are brilliant as a source of tannin. In Britain they're a fairly late introduction, although they are around elsewhere on the continent. Oak apples, now those have been here a long time in Britain. I might use those. I might use a combination. Like I said, those are known on the continent, just not so much in Britain at an early date. However I do it, I'll crush them up, I'll put them in water, I'll bring it up to a boil, then I'll put in the wool and I'll let it stand overnight, and that will put a nice tannin base on, which hopefully will allow some of the colours to stick. Now today one of the most popular mordants is alum, which we tend to know as a white crystal, but it does occur naturally. This is alum, native alum, that's crystallised out of alum-bearing shales. This particular sample is from up in Yorkshire. We know the Romans are using that. We don't know for certain whether the Iron Age peoples are doing so. So it would be tempting to use alum. I'm not going to this time. I'm going to leave a third of my samples absolutely plain unmordanted. A third will be mordanted with galls, and a third I'm going to use iron on. Now iron has also been identified on Iron Age textiles and is entirely suitable for a period with iron in the title. So this is ferrous sulfate. This is prepared iron salts, but I could just as easily have used iron scraps dissolved in slightly acidified water, a bit of vinegar in the water. That would work just as well. I'm going to make a very weak solution, probably about 5% to weight of fibre. Again, brew that up. I'm going to pre-mordant a third of my fibres overnight. This should give me 3 different samples to put my colours onto. Now in terms of dye plants themselves, we'll look at these properly later when I'm on site, but I'm going to be using madder. So these are some homegrown roots here, and these are some commercially prepared roots. I'm going to do an all-in-one bath. I'm going to tie them all up, going to stew them, all 3 skeins, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to be using Weld. This is a bit sun bleached, this stalk, but I've got some more put by. That should give us a nice yellow. I'm also going to be using Woad. Now, unfortunately, I haven't got any fresh Woad in the garden at the moment, so I will be working with powdered Woad, and it's a one-day event, so I'll be cheating. I'll be making a chemical vat. However, I will be talking to people who visit about how it should be done. So the colours that I'm hoping to achieve are a variety of reds and oranges, some really nice yellows, some blues in various shades, hopefully some greens at the end of the day. The iron should make a difference. We'll see what happens there. We'll also be spinning, we'll be braiding, we'll be doing some tablet weaving. Should be a really nice weekend. I'm going to get everything set up. I'll see you on site when I'm properly in costume. We're ready to start dyeing. On the left, we've got unmordanted wool. The only thing that's happened to this is that it's been scoured in hot soapy water using our Iron Age style soap. The middle skein has been scoured and then it's been brewed up in a concoction of oat galls. This is a tannin mordanted skein. And then on the right, the much darker one is iron mordanted. So the same scoured wool, little bit of iron in the water, is essentially it's gone rusty. Now those 3 bases should give us an interesting range of colours. And it's demonstration day. We're at Burnham Beeches today near Slough, and we've got ourselves all set up in this really lovely woodland. It's a nice setting for looking at Iron Age dyes. We've got our fire pit set up, and I've got my Woad, my Weld and my Madder all brewing away there. It'll be a little while before they're ready to see what colours we're getting yet. The really big challenge in a day like this is that we don't know for certain that the dyes that we know from archaeology elsewhere on the continent are exactly the same as would have been found in an area like this. So for example, the first time in Britain that we know for absolute certain that we've got a lot of madder is York, and that's in the Viking period, although there's no doubt that people like the Romans are using it beforehand. Weld might be a later addition, maybe we're using the local greenweed. It's so hard to be certain that what we know from the archaeological record elsewhere in the world is what we have locally. Doesn't mean though that we shouldn't look at what are good solid dyes that have stood the test of time. And over the course of the day we're going to be explaining this to lots of people, looking at the techniques, having a go at some spinning, some braiding, and we'll look back in a bit at what colours are coming out of our dye pots. We've got our Woad vat set up, and I am cheating and using a chemical vat today. This should have been made with fresh Woad leaves, extracted in hot water, and then urine added and allowed to stale over a period of days or even weeks until the vat deoxygenates, the Woad indigo dissolves into a yellow state, at which point we'd be able to apply it to the fibres. I'm using a clever chemical, works very fast, no smell. Not quite the same, but it should allow us to see what's going on. Now, I've only recently set this up, so it's not quite reduced, but we're going to see how it's doing. I've got some fleece that's been soaked. I want to try and get as much oxygen out of it as possible, but I don't want it wringing wet. That's going to go into the vat. Now you can see under the surface this is looking quite green. The ideal would be yellow. It's not quite reduced enough yet. Hopefully we can have a quick look at how it's doing before we get busy. Now, what you don't want to do is introduce much oxygen to the vat until you're ready, because the magic happens when the air hits the dyed fibres. So let's see how we're doing. 2, 3. That's working quite well. As the oxygen hits it, the dye reconverts into a form where it's going to be permanently attached to the fibre. That was an incredibly quick dunk. A longer dip or repeated dips will give us much darker colours, and in fact pretty much all the shades that you can get with blue jeans would be able to get with Woad, because chemically Woad and indigo are very similar. Totally different plants, very similar end result. I'm pleased with that for starters. I'm going to try and improve the vat before we get really busy with visitors, but I think there's going to be plenty of colour magic for them to see. Partway through the day and the dyes are coming along really well. The Weld is producing some really nice yellows, and I've also got a green skein in there which has been dunked in the Woad very briefly and has just gone in to turn nice and green. The Madder is coming on really nicely. I've had some skeins out of here already. That's an unmordanted one, soaking things up. But if I come back over this way, These are some of the madder skeins that have come out already. This one was on tannin, that's unmordanted, and that's an unmordanted one that went in after. And the woad is also coming along really, really nicely. So our rainbow is developing. It's not quite there yet. We're going to do some more colours in a second and see how it comes out. 3/4 of the way through the afternoon now, and our range of colours is coming on quite nicely. But I'm also suffering for one of the downsides of having to have had cheated and used a chemical vat today. My woad vat is not looking well. I don't know if you can see how blue that's looking. I'm giving it a little bit of a warm up now, hopefully to revive it. But I'm going to put a little skein in just so you can see what's going on. Now, it should be yellow. If I was using a proper urine vat, properly reduced, that would be lovely in yellow. But there's so much oxygen in this now that the indigotin molecules, that's the chemical that both woad and indigo share, aren't reducing properly. If I put some white fleece in, that should be looking yellow under the surface, and you can probably see sort of greenish yellow. We'll give that a minute or two and we'll see what's happening. So in an ideal world, that would be looking yellow. The reduced indigotin molecules would be transferring quietly to the fibre, ready for taking out, at which point they'd oxidise and turn blue. But the fact that my dye vat is looking really blue means that either the pH is altered, it's no longer alkali enough, but most likely just too much oxygen has got into this. And we're getting a very imperfect conversion. So far though, it's been enough to show the visitors what's going on. So I'm going to pull this bit out, let me just wring it out under the surface of the water, and hopefully we'll get enough of a conversion to see what's going on. Oh, it's actually quite a big skein this, should have had used 2 hands. Right, okay, let's get this in the light. Are we getting blue? Yes, I think we are. So as the oxygen's hitting it, those dye molecules are changing colour. And it really is quite magical. I'm always curious as to how people first discovered this. Was it medicinally? Maybe there was a poultice of woad and urine and quietly it reduced enough to change colour on the skin? Or was it something more, well, more party related? Maybe there was a corner of a hill fort where lots of woad grew and it just happened to be where the chaps went after a beer too many, and eventually the composty sludge developed a blue scum. Who knows? However it happens, it's certainly one of those magical colour changes there are. I'm going to add this to my collection. Even an imperfect vat is giving me a really nice range of blues. And that little vat, yeah, I think it might just hold out for the rest of the afternoon. Fingers crossed. And here we are at the end of the day, and we haven't done badly with our rainbow. I haven't achieved a proper brick red. I think that's largely to do with the water here, although obviously things like temperature and cooking times will have made a difference. One thing that is interesting is that this peachy orange here was done on my water back in Herefordshire yesterday. This is exactly the same dye, but this is done with the water here in, where are we? Near Slough. So totally different part of the country, very, very different end results. We've got a purpley colour there, which was a little bit of iron on the madder, and then the in-between lavender colour was some of the exhaust of this purpley madder quickly dunked in woad. Coming down a bit, we have the weld yellows. The clear yellow has nothing with it. The slightly darker one next to it has tannin. The olive coming up here had a little bit of iron in it, and the turquoise next to it was weld and woad together. And then the lovely blues, well, these are all from our woad vat. Even though it wasn't running perfectly, we've still got a really nice variety of colours. And it does go to show that working largely with the evidence of sites like Hallstatt and on very limited mordant, so either no mordant, iron or tannin, we can demonstrate that people in the Iron Age had access to a really wide range of colours. Usual caveats: local areas would have had local colours, so we may have used things like greenweed rather than the weld, we may have used a local bedstraw rather than madder. The woad we do know is being used in Britain, but however you look at it, It's been a fantastic day here at Burnham Beeches, and we've come up with a really nice range of colours, and we've had a lot of visitors to talk to. I'll see you in the next video, and we'll see what I'm up to next time. Bye for now.